Good afternoon, Para-Wesley Methodist Bible studiers. Welcome to our next session on the letters of John. And today we are looking at the second chapter of the first letter, reading from verses 3 to 11. But we are going to do a little bit of revision on the background because we need to have a bit of a run-in to see where we are right now. But even before that, I want us just to revise that heresy of Gnosticism. If you are anything like me, you need to see this a few times before you remember it. And I certainly, for myself, need to revisit this so that I've got it in my mind. So just to go through very quickly the same slides that we looked at last week. Gnosticism, one of the most dangerous heresies of the first 2 centuries of the church, was Gnosticism. Its central teaching was that spirit is entirely good and matter is entirely evil. Okay, just that point to remember from that one. Spirit good, matter evil. Errors. Man's body, which is matter, is therefore evil, in contrast with God, who is spirit and good. Salvation is the escape from the body, achieved not by faith, but by special knowledge. Christ's true humanity was denied, and particularly number 2, that the divine Christ joined the man Jesus at baptism and left him before he died, so that God himself did not actually die, and God himself was not actually flesh. Since the body was considered evil, it was to be treated harshly. This is the sort of self-flagellation thing that people would believe. And also, on the other side, that this dualism of spirit and body led to licentiousness, immoral living, that we don't need to obey the law because what we need is knowledge. So I just wanted to go through those as a reminder. I'm just trying to find my other screen now. Of Gnosticism, because it is what permeates the entire letter, is John dealing with problems of people starting to believe this, people wrestling with whether this is the truth or not. Now, I want to go back a little bit into the first chapter, as I said, to get a bit of a run-in to where we're going in chapter 2. So we're not going to do this in detail. I just want to pick out some particular points. So I'm now trying to use this whiteboard thing, which allows me to write on it. I just need to know that I have got the right one. This is the message we have heard. I wonder why my Bible is open at Joshua, which is not helpful. So this is 1 John chapter 1, verses 5 to 10. And I just want us to pick out there, now you see, I think I can do it with this clever thing like this, how often in this passage we have got light and darkness. If I just take myself out the picture, it will be a bit bigger for you to see. Darkness, light, okay, all the way through this business about light and darkness. But similarly, as we're going all the way through, we are picking up the idea of truth and lie. So here, if we're in darkness, we lie and do not live out in the truth. The purified, we claim to be without sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. Here we go, I have a liar, and I think I probably missed a couple up at the top here. But this whole thing of darkness and light, truth, and we deceive ourselves, lying. An important concept for as we go through this letter to understand that relationship, and then particularly in verse 5, God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. We're just going to remember that verse when we get onto the verse in 1 John 2. But then beyond all of this, let me see where my screen is now. I take those out. We have 3 claims in here which are Gnostic claims, so we want to just mark those. There's my highlighter. If we claim, now it's interesting, now we go to the Greek, and that claim is, it really says, if we say, but the way the NIV has chosen to translate is if we claim. If you're following from another version, then you may have a different way of putting it. In verse 8 again, we have if we claim, and verse 10, if we claim. All the same great Greek words, aponomon. Sorry, I need to write it down to see it. And these are the three particular points of heresy that he's pointing out. Just if we want to say we have fellowship with him and that we are friends with God, and yet we walk in darkness, we can't. It can't be true. Okay, if we claim to be without sin, then we're lying. It can't be true, because we all know we were born into sin. Okay, if we claim in verse 10 that we have not sinned, in fact, not only are we born into sin, but each one of us has actually committed sin, we make him out to be a liar. And so John is kind of moving the discussion from knowledge versus sin to sin and truth, and to say that if you are interested in the truth, if you care about the truth, then you need to be looking at how you live. All of those claims are heretic claims of the Gnostics. And now, as we go into chapter 2, we looked at it last week, chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. I don't actually have on a slide for you, but we did that last week very intensely. And to say that that is like a little interlude where John is dealing frantically with the heresy and with the details. And he kind of has a little reassuring interlude there where he says, "My dear children, I write this to you so that you will not sin." And he goes into that. And this to say, I don't believe that you're all evil and monsters. And just a little reminder there, I'm writing this to you because I want to help you. Don't feel that I'm angry and that you hear what I'm saying. He brings in the human element there. And we get it again in verse 7 of chapter 2 and in verse 12 of chapter 2. Now we're going to have a look, if I can find my screen. We're going to have a look at the verses from 3 on, where John says, we know that we have come to know him. Okay, so we pick up the know and the know, the Gnostics. We know and we know if we keep his commands. Now, okay, so that bit we know and we understand. We want to pick up now, thanks to John Stott and, oops, no, that's not what I wanted, and his studying of the Greek, that here where it says, whoever says, okay, see, I was picking that up. Let's see if I can be clever. There's a little bit of practicing here. I'll put the text box. Can I? No, I'm just wasting time. There, I'll put a text box there. Then I can actually, how's that? Or legon. Okay, I'm not putting all the funny little dots in, but that ho legon is the Greek there for verse 4, where it says, whoever says. Here in verse 6 is ho legon. And if you were to go to verse 9, you would see there also ho legon. And it is as John has put in his first chapter, 3 claims that people make that show them to be sin. He is now putting 3 ho legons, okay, the one who says. And so there's kind of it's not poetry, but there's a structure in the letter that we're totally missing because of the translation. So it's just very interesting to see that. So we're going to work through this. Then in terms of there being another 3, what John Stott tells us in his analysis of the letter of John is that there are now 3 tests of how we can know if we are in Jesus, if we're walking in the light, or if we're not. He says there is the moral test, the social test, and the doctrinal test. So we start with the moral test, which is what we find here in verses 3 to 6, which is why we don't have verse 9 on the screen yet, because that's part of the social test, although it forms part of the ho legon sequence and structure. So the first test is the moral test. And John, the writer, says, "Holegon, whoever says I know him, but know him, the gnosis, but does not do what he commands, is a liar, and the truth is not in that person." Again, we're looking there at truth, and he says, if we do not do what he commands, if we do not have the moral stature, the moral uprightness, if we are not obedient, then we cannot be following Jesus. We cannot be walking in the light. Verse 5, but if anyone obeys his word, love for God is truly made complete in them. I'm avoiding the rabbit hole of complete. You might remember when we studied John's Gospel, we're still studying John's Gospel 17 on Sundays. We looked at that complete in terms of joy being complete. And in the first part of John's letter, it also talks about complete. It's actually a different sort of complete, but I'm going to avoid that rabbit hole for now. Then it says, this is how we know we are in him. And it says, Holegon, whoever claims, whoever says that they live in him must live as Jesus did. And again, the NIV in this whole verse, and I'm just having to avoid rabbit hole after rabbit hole, has simplified this verse because this verse does talk about walking as Jesus walked and walking in I don't think it actually says walking in the light, but the whole verse in the Greek is quite a lot longer than this verse in the English translation. So it's simplified, it's bringing out the sense, but again, it's losing a little bit of the poetry. So those are the two holegons there. We're going to go on to the next part from verse 7, which is a little interlude. Dear friends, I like the Greek word here that is agapetoi, agapetoi, the loved ones, beloved. I'm not writing you a new command, but an old one, which you had since the beginning. Okay, from the beginning that Jesus came. It could perhaps be an even earlier beginning, but this is from the beginning when Jesus came. This old command is the message you have heard, right? You know the gospel, you know the story, you know the whole thing about sin and believing in Jesus who rose again and eternal life. This, and ultimately loving one another. This is the old command. But verse 8, yet I am writing you a new command. And I am still wrestling with this one to fully understand it. But what he is saying is, its truth is seen in him and in you because the darkness is passing and the true light is already shining. And so the old command was there. Jesus had come into the world as the light, and the light came into the world. And if we remember now, I said there in the first letter of John where it says God is light and there is no darkness in him at all. Now what John is saying in his letter is that the world is currently in a state where the darkness is passing and the true light is already shining. And I'm trying to visualize this because it's not like the sun coming up, because, well, maybe it's like the sun coming up when it's early sunrise and it's not very light. But once the sun comes up, it is actually pretty light. But there's a sense of a growing light and of the darkness being chased back. And so we live increasingly in a world that is lit up with darkness at the edges. Imagine if perhaps you're in a hall and the lighting is very much in the center part of the hall, and the edges of the hall are in darkness where people can sit and be quiet without having the bright lights and whatever in their faces. We have a choice whether we walk in the light or whether we go to the edges where the darkness is still reigning and live in those dark edges. And it's quite a strong, powerful image, actually, I think, that John is using here to say that we should be living in the light. We need to come into the center where we can be seen and where we can know what we are doing, because if we walk in the dark, we're going to stumble. And so this is his little personal message. He's giving this treatise on anti-Gnosticism and so on to his people. But he says, you guys, my children, my beloved, I want you to realize that the darkness is being overcome and you need to find your way into the light and live like it. This is why it is so important. So that's that little interlude. And now, as always, I need to keep moving. I think we can be quite quick with the next bit. So we're on to verse 9. Okay. anyone who claims, now that claim, we hopefully all remember this one is ho legon. Okay, this all the anyones and the whoever's, it all comes out to ho legon, the one who says. The one who says he is in the light, but hates a brother or sister is still in the darkness. So here we're picking up the social test. The last few verses was the moral test. Do we live as Jesus lived? And now it's the social test. Do we love as Jesus loves? Important to understand that hate and love in this sense are not the emotional things that we so often think about. If somebody hurts you and it's unjust and you feel so angry, you can say, I hate that person. And we kind of know it's wrong, so we say we don't hate that person. But this hate is not that emotional, wound up, angry kind of thing. It's a way of being, I guess. We can have a life that is a way of hating or a way of loving, that we choose to see things as in a negative sense, in a disliking sense, or we choose to see things in a positive sense. In the way that our love for each other as Christians isn't this soppy kind of, let's fall into each other's arms all the time, although for some people it can be. It's more a reason thinking that I choose to treat this person with dignity and respect because this person is loved by God and therefore I love them. And it doesn't affect necessarily my emotions. It is simply something that I choose to do. It doesn't make it superficial. It in fact should make it even deeper. And then the opposite, the hating, again, is a way I choose to live, or perhaps even not choosing to love, but to treat people with a lack of dignity and a lack of respect. And so as John is talking about these social tests, so if we hate our brother or sister, if we treat people in church as if they are somehow less than us, somehow less than the image of God, we are walking in the darkness. Okay, don't worry about knowledge. He says you're in the darkness. You're in the place of lies. Then I'm not going to try and write the Greek out now, though I think I could probably get it right. As we go on to this next bit, anyone who loves their brother, as we've got ho legon in the who claims, anyone who loves is ho agapon. So there we go, the loving one, ho agapon, the one who loves their brother or sister lives in the light, and there's nothing in them to make them stumble. Where do we stumble? We stumble in the darkness, but in the light. And so the moral test, if we love. And then again, we have now ho mison, the hating one. The hating one, whoever hates a brother or a sister, is in the darkness and walks around in darkness. They do not know where they are going because the darkness has blinded them. And so there in verse 9, we have the ho legon, which is finishing the ho legons from the previous part. But we also have a new 3 for the social test, the ho legon, the ho agapon, and the ho mison in verses 9, 10, and 11. And so it's interesting to see kind of the poetry that John has put into it and the structure as we go all the way through. So in chapter 1, we had the 3 claims of the heretic. Can I get the Greek right? Apomen. Right there. I have to write it down. I can't think it without writing it. And then we go into chapter 2 with the 3 ho legons, and then the ho legon, ho agapon, ho mison from the moral test and the social test to see if we're walking in the light. And that, I think, is quite enough from me. The session will be going into Zoom. This has been a recorded message because I will currently, as you listen to this, be in a meeting somewhere. But I trust that you will enjoy the Zoom conversation as you join it. And thank you to those that listened, both at 12 o'clock and later on. May God bless you.